Hey, before we start the show, just a couple of quick things. The first one is that we will be wrapping up season 1 shortly. So the last episode of season 1 will be on January 29th. But we will just be taking a week off and then starting season 2. So more to come about season 2 soon. It'll be still the same idiom goodness, but we're going to add some other stuff. Oh, Kale's done. But anyway, the other thing is, before today's show, we wanted to share a quick promo from our friends at the Corner House podcast. These guys are solid and some bearded dudes that talk about beer.
Hey everyone, I'm John.
And I'm Jason. We invite you to listen to the Corner House Chronicles,
where we like to find and discuss interesting stories from around the globe.
We sample and review a different Michigan craft beer on each episode.
And we also feature a guest from time to time to share their stories with you.
You can find us at chcpodcast.com, where we have links to all of our social media pages,
as well as links to all your preferred podcast streaming platforms. It's kind of like overhearing a conversation that was meant for you.
It's just different enough.
So we've just completed recital season at my house.
Yeah.
Which consisted of one play and one piano recital. And I'm good with that. That's good. I went into it with a great attitude, enjoyed watching it, but I was pretty much done. Do your kids have to do those sort of things?
Yes. And I only had one this year, and thankfully, it was so great because it was like just the one class doing one play. It wasn't the thing where like show up at 6:00 on a Friday night and we're gonna watch every kid in the school shine.
That is the worst.
I don't want to watch your kid shine.
No one does. And that's the social contract that keeps us there, because you can't leave. No. First of all, no one there wants to see your kid. Everyone wants to see their own kid.
Right.
But you also know you can't get up and leave after your kid goes.
It is a really weird concept now that we're saying it, we're speaking it out loud, because you've got all these parents in the audience, and it is like a recital, like a piano thing where they all go up and take their turns.
Yeah.
And nobody there wants to see any of the other kids, but yet you've all got to stay.
And you can't say it.
Right.
Everyone's thinking the same thing.
But the great lie is that you tell yourself that other people think what your kid is doing is cool, or at least now that we're saying it, it's so true, but you're basically sitting in a room with a bunch of other people, because let's strip this down. You could just have your kid do it at home and you guys stare at your kid while, it wouldn't feel as good, right? Why? Right. Because she's doing it in front of all these other people.
Who are a captive audience who don't want to watch.
Exactly, who don't want to be there. So, well, we just had the one. I'm really bad at keeping up with that stuff. So my daughter did one. She was angel number 2. Mm-hmm. And at first I was like, well, come on. That's Mary, come on, you got to step up your game. But turns out angel number 2 has a lot of lines.
Okay,
she closed out the show. It was pretty good. My son, I don't know what his story is. I think maybe he's not telling me that he's having these things, because it used to be all the time. Now it's, he's not into all that, which is fine. You know what? Son not being into theater, I'm okay with it. He's still playing baseball.
There you go. Mine, 2 roles she went for were the Virgin Mary or a sheep. Which I just thought was, there wasn't a middle role or somewhere in between.
Angel number 2.
Maybe. But you're either shooting for the top or you're shooting kind of low, in my estimation. But
that's sweet, though. She wanted,
The important thing is it's done, and I'm okay with that, and so is everyone else, until 6 months from now when we have to
recital season is over.
Recital season's over.
Yeah.
Just the bleak, endless cold of winter.
Well, we've been sitting here talking about our daughters, so this is a very awkward idiom that we're about to do here.
All right.
The first one for tonight is Peeping Tom.
Peeping Tom.
Yes. So
That segue set up a little bit better than I think we wanted it to, but
should we start over and do a new intro?
end it. Peeping Tom. So Peeping Tom is somebody that is a voyeur. It's a term used to describe a voyeur, someone who peeps in and looks at things they're not supposed to.
Yep.
Generally, I've seen that in the context of it being more of a sexual thing, that you're looking into something, sexually, a nude person or someone engaged in an act that you shouldn't. That's the context.
You're not just looking for something that's like an artistically or what's the word that's always tastefully
done. The context that I always see is you're not popping your head in just to see what people are watching on TV, but maybe you are. I don't know.
This has just occurred to me that I feel like it's the end of an era, or it has been the end of an era with like movies where there were guys like, trying to get a look at things because, you don't
have to.
You don't really have to now.
Yeah. But Peeping Tom is, as you said, that you don't really hear that used as much anymore or referred to, but I think it's because we're all Peeping Toms now.
Oh, wow. That's deep.
Gonna get deep. Not just so there's the, sexual aspect of it. But think about all the things that are on, what are the big shows? They're reality shows. They're true crime stories on podcasts where you hear 911 calls.
Yeah.
I mean, we're all voyeurs in Peeping Toms now. It's kind of almost gone mainstream, which I think maybe is one of the reasons you don't see that anymore, is someone poking their head in and looking at something, because the whole world's a girls' locker room for us to peek in.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it
sounds like the beginning of a horrible TED Talk, but I'm sorry, I was talking over.
No, it's so I guess it used to be sort of to like get your jollies or get a thrill.
Yeah.
You had to sneak around or catch somebody in the act or whatever. Which, by the way, there's another term I learned during my research for this, which again, had to do this research on the personal computer because it's not something you want to be researching at work. But
it would be a fun conversation for you and your HR
just tell
representative.
Them it's a new app or something that I'm researching for work or something. But there's another term which I had never heard of. I mean, we've all heard of Peeping Tom. We know what it means. But have you ever heard of dogging? Dogging. It's... No. Basically, dogging is, because it sounds like a very sexual thing, but it's the act of specifically looking for people that are engaged in sexual activity in cars and like sneaking up and
okay, so it's more of it's a brand. It's not the term. I'm looking for a term.
Yeah, it's like a subgenre of
there we go,
Toms.
subgenre, or maybe a specification, kind of like you could major in
right. What's your concentration?
There we go. That's what's your
majored in Peeping Tom. I'm a dogging major. Okay, cool. I'm into the whatever.
I'm the guy behind the shed.
Right. I have to be on a tree limb. It's just my thing. But which again, so the first thing I think of when I hear Peeping Tom, which let's be honest, I never hear,
right,
is Back to the Future. I think about Marty McFly's dad.
Oh, yeah.
What's his name?
George McFly. Crispin Glover.
I think about George McFly.
In the tree.
Yep. And he falls out. Gosh, Crispin Glover was so good in that role. Like, oh my gosh.
Side note, have you watched that movie recently?
Not really.
It's a great movie. I've watched it a tremendous amount of times. Watched it a few years ago. It's still a great movie, but it's very interesting to watch it as an adult with children. There's just other things in there.
Oh, really?
That it's still good, but just things like you think of that as like a PG movie, right?
Yeah.
And it's a.
Is it like suggestive stuff?
Well,
or?
There's the Peeping Tom.
Yeah.
There's some of the things that there's Biff and the mom in the car.
That is.
That is aged awkward. I mean, it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a comfortable thing, but you kind of pick up on some more subtleties of it as an older person.
Well, good to know, because that is like on the list of movies that I want to introduce the kids to, but have not actually.
Do a warming lap
check
through
it out
there first. Yeah.
Although, I mean, have you noticed how no matter how much you sort of watch something and think it's okay, when you do end up watching it with your kid, all of a sudden you're like, why didn't this bother me before? Because my kid wasn't sitting right here, and I have to explain whatever this is now.
But if you want to explain Peeping Tom, you could use...
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I'll just tell him to listen to the podcast. That's normally what I do when he tries to have a conversation with me. Listen to the podcast, son. If you still have questions, come to me.
Go.
So, any idea where the phrase came from?
So I'm racking my head. I can't think of anyone historically named Tom that was famous for peeking in. But
Right.
that's just, it sounds like a term that's been around a long time.
It has been around a long time, and this comes from, so I'd heard the term Lady Godiva before,
Yeah.
but have no idea who she was, what it meant. All I think about is Godiva chocolate. Do you know anything about Lady Godiva?
Lady Godiva was naked on a
Aha.
horse.
Ooh.
And somehow from that, chocolate came out years later. I don't know that might be another podcast. How did a naked lady on the horse end up
Yeah.
with high-end chocolate?
I don't know that there's any, I mean, there must be a connection, but in my research, it didn't come up as far as the chocolate goes, but, so she was definitely an actual person, and she was married to this guy, Leofric, Earl of Mercia, and I guess there are different versions of it, but essentially, she was trying to get him to reduce taxes in one story, in the other, it was getting him to create a monastery at Coventry, which is where they lived.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever the story was, it definitely was that she was sort of a patron of the town,
Okay.
going, look, husband, you're a jerk. And his challenge to her was, okay, ride, like, as any leader would do
Yeah.
to his wife, ride naked through town there and back, and if nobody looks, I'll do this thing that you asked,
Okay.
right? So it kind of reminds me of like some sort of like biblical like test, you know what I mean? Like I don't know why I thought of Lot, and Lot's like, spare the city.
Yeah,
He's like,
just
find
don't look
one
back.
good person, right? Yeah, don't look back. And I felt like this story is he's going, okay, you think these people are so good? Go do this, and if nobody looks at you, then I'll do this thing. Wouldn't you know it? A guy named Tom got caught peeping. So, honestly, it wasn't as simple as that, but it does come from Lady Godiva.
Well, if you want to get an idiom in the ether, I think having a naked woman on a horse is a good way to kind of prop it up and keep it going. Works for me. It resonates. And apparently if you want to sell high-end chocolate.
Right. So the Peeping Tom story, actually, we don't think it came from like literature. It's more so just been passed down through oral tradition, but they keep doing this thing. Actually, to this day, they have this Tom, effigy of Tom, and they'll have someone dress up in, not actually be nude, but in like beige colored silk,
right,
and do this ride, do the whole thing. So she's sort of looked at as not really a saint, but so we know this because there was an article in 1826 that was submitted by a guy who it was like a letter to the editor. It was W. Reader. And he spoke about this tradition where there was a tailor who had spied on Lady Godiva. And every year at the annual Trinity Great Fair, which is now called the Godiva Festival, still goes on, that a grotesque figure called Peeping Tom would be set on display. And it was like a wooden statue carved out of oak. And it wasn't necessarily even named Tom. It was just a tailor. And there's this book, The Dictionary of National Biography. So this historian in 1732, Paul de Rapine, reported that Lady Godiva performed her ride while commanding all persons to keep within doors from their windows on pain of death, but one man could not refrain from looking, and it cost him his life. So in this version, he gets, I guess, killed, and that the town commemorates this with a statue of a man looking out of a window. So
that's good. Well, I don't know. I like how that story ends, at least, with the dirty pervert at least getting his comeuppance. Is the statue, is he like wearing like a raincoat?
He looks terrible. I'll show you this picture. This is the wooden statue of Peeping Tom. Like he is a grotesque figure. He doesn't have like arms. Well, you know why they didn't do arms on it, right? Because it would have cost an arm.
No.
Got to keep it cheap.
Probably if it was an accurate representation of Peeping Tom, we wouldn't want to see where those arms are.
It's probably more to that.
Well, good, dirty old bird.
So the oldest document that actually says Peeping Tom is in the Coventry's official annals back in June of 1773, documenting that the city had issued a new wig and paint for the wooden effigy, and they called it Peeping Tom. So we don't know if there was an actual Tom. And again, it varies with, he died, he was struck blind, the husband didn't, build the monastery or whatever, but there you go. That's who Peeping Tom, that's where Peeping Tom came from. So
you and I both, when we hear that, we know what a Peeping Tom is.
Yeah.
If we said it to someone 20 years younger, would they even get that reference? Does anyone know what that is anymore?
That's a great question. I've been surprised recently with some of the ones that we've done that people don't know. So I've gotten feedback on, well, first of all, Eric didn't know what Beyond the Pale was.
Right.
But I don't think a lot of people knew what that was. I got some feedback. People didn't know what Throw Out the Baby with the Bathwater was. I got messages saying, I've never heard this. I'm like, really? So I wouldn't be surprised if something like Peeping Tom.
Yeah. And I also think it shows good judgment on you that this isn't the one maybe you led with also. Now that I've said it out loud to you, it's probably good that you didn't do your typical research on if people know these. Especially if it's rainy outside.
I didn't ask anybody. So I do my research, which is a whole lot of Google, some of my favorite websites, and going to my coworkers saying, hey, what do you think this means? That reminds me, I do have a story from, actually I did talk to one of my coworkers about this one. So I did ask a coworker, and it was a woman, so I'm doubly in trouble. And I was like, you know where Peeping Tom comes from? And she goes, no. And I said, yeah, Lady Godiva, this, that, and the other. And she was like, well, I have a story for you. I was like, okay. And she said, she goes, you need to warn people on your podcast that you got to be really careful, because she had this situation where a good friend of hers, I guess, was going through some troubles in her marriage. Mm-hmm. And the husband was stepping out. Mm-hmm. And she was like, well, I'm getting proof of this because this is going to help my case when it comes down to the nitty gritty. So this is a true story. So she basically tails the person and sure enough catches them in the act and like rolls tape and ends up getting, so she's thinking, I'm the righteous person here. I'm going to get tape of this or I'm going to get video of this. And sure enough, she ends up getting arrested and charged for, I think the law itself is called being a Peeping Tom. It's called, they literally, I think, use those terms. So anybody that's thinking you can't do that, unfortunately. But yeah, I don't know if people know what Peeping Tom is, but now they do. If not, just wait till you hear the next one, because ain't nobody heard of the next one, including myself. So, all right, let's talk. Let's move on.
Okay.
And let's talk about our mission in this podcast, which are many missions we have, and one of them is
alert people about bears. Keep people in the loop of all the animals that I dislike, which is pretty much, if you can think of an animal, it's probably on that list.
Yeah.
Keeping certain idioms alive that we think are good.
And that's the one I want to talk about.
Okay.
So, we have done some episodes recently that were requests, and I think I've been kind of vocal with some of them saying, like, these can go the way of the dodo. I'm not feeling them. And we all know that I'm a big taste maker. We are when it comes to idioms, right? So, but the ones that we love, I mean, I think you and I agree. Loaded for bear.
Yeah.
Cut of your jib.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I'm really passionate about.
I'm with you on that.
When we do these, like, some of them are just, hey, I'm curious. Like, maybe you aren't curious, but I like Beyond the Pale. I always wanted to know what that meant, and finally know what that means. But this one is one that I had never heard of until I started, doing the podcast, and every once in a while it would pop up and I go, what in the world? And then I heard it. I was listening to another podcast the other day, and somebody said, Bob's your uncle.
Bob's your uncle.
And as like, you should know what that means type of thing. Like, all right, just come on down to the shop and Bob's your uncle. And I'm like, what in the world is Bob's your uncle? But I liked it right off the bat. I don't know why.
It's catchy.
So have you ever heard this one?
I want to say I've heard it, but I can't put it in context of how to say it like in a sentence. Like it reminds me of one of those things like some sort of, I don't know if non sequitur is a term, or just something like if you want to say, going to see a man about a horse, or, say something to maybe deflect from what's going on in the situation. But I've heard that before, but I can't think of how to use it in a sentence or what it means in its context.
Well, you're better off than me because I don't think I'd ever heard it, but I want to start using it. I want to get this one out there because this one essentially means like it's a British one, and that's why we haven't heard it as much. It's used more in England or in Britain. And again, I can't, since I don't live there, I don't know how much it is used, but I do think it's used more because when I looked it up, like it was everywhere. Like there's a ton of, in popular culture, it's actually used a fair amount. Like, so, and people will say things like Robert's your auntie's husband as like a funny way of getting to Bob's your uncle. The way that it's used, and as I started reading examples of it, it's an exclamation, right? So it's like a punctuation to a sentence saying like, everything's okay, you're all good, you're taken care of. Bob's your uncle.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, I come to you and say, my car is not running real well. And you go, oh, go see my guy down the street, and Bob's your uncle. Okay.
And voila.
Voila. Exactly. Like, voila. Boom, boom.
It's done.
Nowadays, you know what we say a lot now?
Bada bing.
Yeah. Bada bing. Yeah, there you go. We say boom, or I do. I say it all the time. And it came from like, it started getting popular like 10 years ago or something. Like
boom?
Yeah. Like
that punctuate. Wasn't that Emeril Lagasse's catchphrase? Since we can't stop talking about...
Have you seen Emeril Lagasse nips? I'm not kidding. He also has... No, I am kidding.
Okay. Whatever happened... I haven't seen him in years. Like, he went like Richard Simmons. Like, is he still around?
No clue.
Okay.
No clue.
Future.
No, he was... Man, he was one of the first. He was like one of the first. So, yeah, you're right. Boom started there, but I think... I remember hearing more people say that to punctuate their sentences, like, and I say it all the time. So, all right, well, where did it come from? Why in the world? Because it does also sound a little maybe creepy. I don't know. Anything with uncle in it.
Yeah, it gets weird. But I think it's also the context and maybe the way you say it. If someone in a raincoat that you found looking in your Aunt Peggy's window says Bob your uncle, it could be a code for something else that's about to happen.
Yeah. So, okay, we will say here that this story I'm about to tell, you can't swear that it's true. We don't know for sure that this is the origin, but I like it, and it seems to make some sense. So where this came from was, at least the biggest, most popular story out there, is the 20th British Prime Minister had a bunch of names, okay? Viscount Cranbourne, Robert Arthur Talbot, Gracegoyne Cecil. That was his full name. Man. We're just going to call him Bob for these purposes.
Thank you.
He was the third Marquess of Salisbury, and he had a big old beard. So we're going to call him Bob. And he appointed his nephew, Arthur Balfour, to several political posts in the 1880s. So Balfour ended up as the prime minister after his uncle, but he was... Basically, this was this was real. This is nepotism here. Yeah. And nepotism comes from the word nephew. So this all kind of comes back to this whole situation. So it makes a lot of sense. And this is why I love it so much, is because you can see people saying it. Like, you say, oh, go talk to my guy down there, and Bob's your uncle. And like, you're all set.
Okay. I like that.
So this guy Balfour, nobody thinks would have ever become a political, or would have never become a celebrated politician or prime minister without his uncle. So this phrase became very popular, and it's actually also used in the Greek community, but they say Spiro is your uncle. and it's strictly used to denote nepotism. So now there are other interpretations. It has also been... hypothesized that the phrase derives from a slang term, all is Bob, meaning all is well. Okay. That was we've talked about the Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue. This was all the way back to 1785, and they said all is Bob, all is safe. So the slang word Bob had been in circulation for a long time. But
I don't know. To me, the uncle thing and
Yeah.
the nepotism thing and the fact that these were real guys, like,
Yeah.
I like it.
I like it. There's a bit of logic to it, and it doesn't feel as, I don't know. Some of these feel like backward engineered, like they're trying to like make it fit no matter what. This seems to fit.
Yeah.
And by the way, if I could comment on
Please.
the Greek version of that, based on my experience with Greeks, it would, Nick is your uncle would probably be the
Yeah. There was also a musical review in Dundee, Scotland, called Bob's Your Uncle. And this was, this came out in June of 1924. There was also lyrics in a song in 1931 called Follow Your Uncle Bob, which this does sound creepy. The lyrics are, Bob's your uncle, follow your Uncle Bob. He knows what to do. He'll look after you.
Yeah. That does get a little bit weird.
It gets a little weird. It is said a lot, like it's in popular culture a lot as I read a lot of these things. It's just not stuff I look at. I mean, or it's just not stuff I watch. I mean, Bob's Your Uncle was a British primetime game show in the 1990s. So this one's kind of out there. I mean, there's a bunch of other ones.
It's
here.
our job to bring it over. Just like with the Great British Baking Show, they made a terrible version called the Great American Baking Show, which I refuse to watch out of principle.
Right.
We're going to take it, bring it over here, but do a good job.
That's right. So use it. Let's start getting, instead of, it's the new boom. Bob's Your Uncle is the new boom.
Yeah. In the same way that you don't really need to be a Peeping Tom anymore because you have a computer. You don't need to rip off Emerald Lagasse. Bob's Your Uncle. I'm the guy behind the shed.